When we think about February of 1964 and we think about where we were, Bill, I'd like to start with you and ask you a question as a music historian. Can you kind of set the stage for us as to where American music was in '64 just prior to the arrival of the Beatles?
Yeah, it's funny. When you were saying that, I was just thinking a couple of months before Ed Sullivan, Walter Cronkite's evening newscast had a piece ready to go on this mania in England for these four British boys, and it was a whole thing, and it was going to be on the CBS Evening News, and it got bumped because it was scheduled to run on November 22nd, 1963. So the Beatles got bumped out of their spot, and it never ran because of the assassination of JFK. For those of us who were kids at the time, it was sort of tied up together, that you had this winter of national mourning, and it's almost hard to even explain, if you're younger, how profound that was. And then just before the spring comes the world changes.
So when you guys hear the Beatles for the first time, some of you're all different ages here, but let's just start with Ron. When you hear the Beatles, did the Beatles have the same impact on you personally and as a musician as it did for the people and the artists and the young musicians in 1964?
I was born in '64, so I wasn't, I was always, I don't remember a time where I wasn't aware of the Beatles, I mean, I remember my mom even woke me up to see them on the David Frost show when they did Hey Jude, when I was about 3 or something. I think what they did was, but you always had these solo artists like Sinatra and Elvis, and maybe some people thought, oh, I could sing like that or I could sing better. But when the Beatles came along, it all of a sudden, I'm sure bass guitar sales and drum sales went through the roof, right? Because all of a sudden it just looked so much fun to be in a band with three other guys, to make music, and they'd see these films of the Beatles running around and being silly or whatever, and that became this thing where there's strength in numbers, and that's the thing that's in the Harrison documentary, he said how many Beatles does it take to change the light bulb, and he said 4, and it's kind of that thing that it just seemed more possible with in a group setting, and so that appealed to me, and I know that when I was old enough to want to be a songwriter or a singer, that's kind of what you listen to. I always loved people who were strong melodically, and the Beatles were kind of second to none, really.
Rodney?
So in '64, and it was a pinnacle moment for me then, because I was been 13, and the Beatles were performing at the Coliseum in Houston, and my friend and I, we go, and we had tickets, and it was open seating, so we all had to stand in line, and the doors were closed, and I got first-hand taste of Beatlemania, because just this mass of human bodies or teenagers, hormone, just kept pushing into each other to the point where I wasn't sure any of us could breathe when they finally opened the door and we rush in there and get a good seat because we were down pretty close. But then there's this powerful moment, and then this has to do with, and I think all of us musicians admit that we wanted to get on stage so we could show off for girls and get a girl. And if you have some good music, God bless you. But when they come out, you couldn't hear a note they played, but all you could see was their physical movement. And then Paul McCartney takes his hand and kind of does that to the audience, and 300 young girls faint dead away. And I'm sitting about 8 rows up on the side, so I had a perfect view of what kind of power that is. And I said, all right, how do you access that? My young mind. And that's one other little thing about culturally at the time. I also had a paper route, delivered Houston Post newspapers and hung a transistor. Man, this is what was great. When you hang a transistor radio on your bicycle, you deliver newspapers and they play 5 Beatles songs in a row, like number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 at the top of the charts, and you just start pedaling faster and get your work done. It's like the power of that music. It was energizing, and it was a rebirth.
Yeah, I was there because I grew up in Britain, so we actually had it a year before y'all had it over here. As Ron says, that it was extremely inclusive. I could be Beatle Robin, and my sister would be Beatle Lal, and then the cat would be Beatle Steve, you know. And it just went out. Even your parents were, if you were in a good mood, could become Beatles. Anything or anyone, animate or could become Beatles. And it was a terrific way of, as a lot of us, you know, we've been thinking of spreading the momentum of whatever it was that was about to appear in the 60s. The Beatles basically turned everyone into a medium for this. The fact that there were 4 guys, 3 of which were 5 foot 11 and a half inches. Same.
So they said on the car.
So it said on the back of the cornflakes packet, you know, that were born within a few miles of each other and a few years of each other in Liverpool, who looked effectively like brothers. It wasn't like one of them had, you know, frizzy corkscrew hair and one of them was a long Saxon blonde. No, without even hair dye, those guys looked exactly the same. It was just made. Then I don't know what Pete Best's hair was like, but Ringo, a half inch shorter than the other 3, came in, boom, you had it. It was merchandise, it was genius, but the music was also diabolically beautiful. To this day, I parade between 1965 and 1968 just with my guitar trying to work out new Beatle chords, and all my musician friends do the same thing. If it was designed, if it was put there by a higher power or something from another planet or the CIA, I could believe any of it. You know, we didn't know. We just took it for granted. We just thought, oh yeah, it's the Beatles. Of course it is. That's what happened. 3 of them actually lived in St. George's Hill. They bought houses in the town that I was at school in. But I just thought, you know, because I was 11, I thought, well, of course, the Beatles go and live in your town. You know, it was... But, man, they follow you around, you know. Here we are, 50 years later. There's no escape. There is nowhere to go. And that's it.
So we've heard what Beatlemania was and what it did to people who experienced it firsthand. The question is why? I'm going to turn to you, Bill. Why did this happen? I mean, it could have been the Beach Boys, and there was a little bit of a clamor about the Beach Boys when people in Des Moines, Iowa were buying surfboards, and it wasn't an ocean within 2,000 miles, but there was this sense of belonging there. But that paled by comparison. The Beatles,
you know, they were. I mean, you know, really, they were just better than everybody else. I mean, let's not beat around the bush too much. It's interesting because if you're in England, you kind of got to see them with the halfway bad Beatle haircuts, and you know, but in America, it was just, we didn't know that it was a year and a half of really heavy work that we were getting all at once. We just thought they made an album every week. You know, I mean, they appeared on Ed Sullivan, and in February, you know, 3 weeks in a row, which was amazing in itself, because as you said, if you missed, I remember, you know, my brother and sister and I fighting over the TV because they wanted to watch the Beatles and I wanted to watch the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, and we'd go back and forth in the commercials. But the next day in school, nobody was talking about the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh. So yes, by the second week, everyone was a Beatle. And, you know, that thing of the gang that Ron mentioned, you know, McCartney believes that. He believes that, to a degree that he didn't even appreciate when they were Beatles, that the power of that idea of 4 guys or 4, you know, guys and girls or whatever it is, you know, Sly and the Family Stone, that sense of this is our gang, this is our community, this is our team, is really, really a powerful thing, particularly for kids and for teenagers, you know, where you're sort of trying to move out of your family and find a new family. And, you know, you go from the Ed Sullivan Show in February to Hard Day's Night around July or August. And in between, there's something like 4 or 5 albums and every song on the charts. It's just an avalanche of creativity. And when you saw Hard Day's Night, it just looked like they were right and everybody with Bermuda shorts was wrong. You know, it was just like, well, of course, what team do you want to be on?